Thanks everyone so much for coming today. My name is Gib Clark. I am the coordinator of the Wilson Center's Global Health Initiative and the program associate with our Environmental Change and Security program, the two programs that are co-sponsoring today's event. I want to say a special thanks to Charlotte Feldman-Jacobs and Michal Avni and the Interagency Gender Working Group for helping coordinate today's event. And this is the second event in as many weeks we've done with them. Last week we looked at another really underreported issue, child sexual abuse. And we're really looking forward to today's conversation and discussion with Rana. In today's event, we are looking at her new book titled Murder in the Name of Honor. The subject of so-called honor killings has not received terrible amount of media attention in the West, but I think we're starting to see some signs that this is changing a little. Including last month, we had Nicholas Kristof here and Cheryl Wudun, and they presented their new book Half the Sky, which presents a full chapter to the issue, and they mention it kind of throughout as a critical issue. Murder in the Name of Honor was described in one of the reviews I read of it as disturbing, informative, and readable. And I think that is a really critical combination of words. I'd add powerful to that, but I think that those words describe the book because it really paints a vivid picture, pulling the reader in but not leading to despair by the reader, which I think is equally important. You have her full bio in the handout that was available at the door, but I will just say briefly that Rana Husseini is one of the world's most influential investigative journalists. Her reporting with the Jordan Times has put violence against women on the global agenda, and she has received several awards for her work, including a medal from Jordan's King Abdullah II in 2007 for her reporting on honor crimes. One last note before we get started. You'll see there's a camera in the back. We're webcasting this event live, and it'll be up again on archived video soon. Don't worry about this one. It was on, but we're not taking your pictures anymore. Only you, yeah. So when we're in the Q&A, please wait for the microphones to come around so that people watching on TV know who you are. I'm going to get out of the way. One last note, though, to say that we have a representative from Writers Bookstore outside, so you can pick up a copy of the book on your way out, and I think you'll be available for some time for some signing if you like. So with that, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Gib, for making this a reality. That's the first time I meet Gib, by the way. It was all through emails. I just sent an email to people to announce my book, and he told me, if you're ever in D.C., let me know. So here I am in D.C. Thank you very much. I'll talk for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll open the floor for discussion, because I would like to hear from you. I will start by defining a so-called honor crime, just in case. Are you all familiar with what's an honor crime? So, okay, we'll skip that. Okay, of course, so-called honor killings, the murder of women is an international phenomenon. It's not something that is restricted to a certain nation, religion, or class. I think all over the world, women are killed for various reasons. When we come to so-called honor killings, the UN estimated in 2000 that 5,000 women are killed annually for reasons related to family honor. Of course, this back then, I think the number is not. I think the number is much higher, and I think the number now is even much higher. Regardless, 5,000, 10,000, one woman, I think it's too much. And I always insist that the issue of violence against women should be addressed in a global form, a global context, because, as I said, 1 in 3 women would be subjected to some form of violence in her life, according to UN figures. In the past, it was 1 in 4, now it's 1 in 3. So I always say that this is an issue that needs to be constantly addressed. Of course, I will talk a bit about my book, about my work, but I have to stress that most of the countries, in addition to Jordan, that did work on so-called honor killings included Pakistan, Turkey, Lebanon, Syria, Yemen, and Palestine. Of course, I think the majority of the work is done in Jordan. Don't think I'm biased, but now when I tell you more, you will understand why I talk a lot about Jordan. Of course, I studied in the U.S. from 87 till 93. I was in Oklahoma, and when I returned to Jordan, I was assigned as the crime reporter for the Jordan Times. I never imagined that I was going to be involved in this topic. When I was here, I knew that I wanted to work on women's issues, but I never imagined that I will end up taking up this cause, receiving awards, writing a book, becoming an activist, going around talking about it. But I guess that's part of life. It takes you to places where you do not imagine. 6 months into my career, I came across a very sad story of a 16-year-old schoolgirl who was killed by her family. And the reason she was killed was because she was raped by one of her brothers. So the family decided that they want to punish her. This girl was a victim 6 times. She was raped. She became pregnant, underwent a secret abortion, then married to a man 34 years older than her, and then 6 months later this man divorced her. And the day he divorced her, her family killed her, blaming her for the rape. And when I went to discuss the issue with her uncles, they basically accused her of seducing her brother to sleep with her. Now, this is not like a typical case that happened, but I guess it was the case that made me start all this. I reported it for the Jordan Times, and the following day we received a call from an intellectual woman who was working in a high position, and she was screaming and yelling at my editors that they should stop me from reporting these crimes, because this does not happen in Jordan, and it's not our society, and I was tarnishing Jordan's image and so forth. So I became even more enraged because the call came from a woman, and I decided that I wanted to document all the cases, because at that time, these crimes were not reported at all. Violence against women was not on the radar of the newspapers. If it would happen, they would have like a small item, a man killed his sister, police are investigating, or the crime will go unreported. Then I went to courts, and I discovered that men who killed were getting away with very lenient sentences, 3 months, 6 months, maximum 1 year, and I found this also very unfair. So I decided that I wanted to also focus on that. And then one time I went to the prison, and I discovered that women, to do a story just on women prisoners, and I discovered that women who survive these murders, or ones who become pregnant out of wedlock or so forth, they put them in prison for indefinite periods. They cannot release themselves, and usually if someone wants to release them, it's to kill them. And I have seen some who've been there for over 10 years. They're wasting their life, their youth. And as an activist, of course, I felt that usually if someone threatens someone's life, they have to be in prison and not the other way around. So these were the 3 things that I focused on. And people, even my friends, were telling me, what are you doing? You're wasting your time. You're preaching the believers. Nothing ever changes in this country. You know, you always have these pessimistic people. But I didn't listen to them. I listened to my heart, my conscience, the logic behind it. And I said I want to document all this in hopes that someone will hear me. You know, the Jordan Times is read basically by the government, by decision makers, by the royal family, by diplomatic missions. So I said I'm going to keep nagging the government until one day maybe they will do something. Shortly afterwards, we started receiving letters to the editor from readers who were really surprised, upset, wanted the government to take action, to do something about it. And in 1998, I was nominated for the Reebok Human Rights Award. And this award is given to 4 individuals in the world for their work on human rights issues. And when I came here to the U.S. to receive the award, I discovered that I wasn't only a journalist, I was actually a human rights activist. So things also became more bigger for me. During that time, I appeared on several international TV shows, including CNN, ABC, and these shows really drew a lot of light on Jordan. So when I returned to Jordan, a group of young men and women approached me and said, let's do something on the grassroots level. Let's try to tackle this problem from its grassroots. So we formed a committee called the Jordanian National Committee to eliminate so-called honor crimes. And we were meeting on a regular basis every week to see what we wanted to do. It was a big group, and then it ended up being 11, 7 women and 4 men. And at the same time, the government was suggesting to make some amendments to the penal code that talks about adultery. So we decided that we wanted to collect signatures and present them to the parliament in hopes that they will cancel the articles that discriminate against women, including this article, which is Article 340. We went out to various governorates, talking to people, distributing pamphlets, collecting signatures. It was a very important and interesting experience. At that time, the media picked up the issue. They started writing about us, writing about our campaign. We were lecturing. We appeared on TV and so forth. So a big debate happened at that time, and people with us, people against us, accusing us of being Western agents. And then there was a public march to the parliament. So it was really, really a very interesting and important time, I think, in Jordan's history, because we were able at that time to break 2 taboos. The first taboo was discussing this issue, because now if you talk to people, it's a normal issue. It's no longer something that people avoid talking about. The other thing is we were able to express ourselves as citizens. For the longest time, people were always afraid to sign petitions. But because people were really enthusiastic and they wanted to do something, they all signed our petitions. So this was another taboo that we broke, which is expressing ourselves as citizens. Of course, the law went into parliament. It was rejected. As I said, all these problems. And a lot of people said that you have failed because the law did not pass. Of course, this law that the government suggested was not the law being applied in courts. But they decided that they want to target it, and we said we'll adopt it as a symbolic start. But I think, of course, as I said, we did manage to, we succeeded, and I will tell you now that everything good that happened in Jordan after that regarding this issue. We succeeded, as I said, in breaking the taboo. The most important thing is we pushed the government to acknowledge the problem, and when you succeed in acknowledging the problem, you can hold the government accountable if they do not protect women. And in the past, I would say there's around 20 cases every year in Jordan. In the mid-90s, they would tell you, oh, we only have few cases. And then when the issue became very hot, okay, we have 10 or 11. But now they really talk about real figures, this is something very important. The other important thing is that in 2000, the British government supported a 5-year project called the Family Protection Project, whereby they trained judges, criminal prosecutors, police, forensics, health officials, and so anyone dealing with domestic violence on detecting and working with domestic violence victims, detecting murders. Sometimes a woman, her family brings her, okay, she was run over by mistake by her brother, or she committed suicide. I mean, now they're digging into these cases, and sometimes they discovered it was murders. Criminal prosecutors themselves, in the past, they used to take these cases very lightly, because almost always the killer, when he kills, he turns himself in with the weapon. So to them, it's a solved case. A lot of times it's for other reasons, not for inheritance, for financial matters, for choosing a man to marry. She's went missing from her home, being a victim of suspicion, rumors, incest, rape. So you have all these factors, and now they're paying much more attention. And the same with the judges. Now the judges are more aware. They're starting to pass tougher sentences against killers. And of course, everybody knows me at the criminal court. So whenever they had a very tough sentence, they call it to my attention. Or the criminal prosecutor will tell me, oh, listen, this case, they tried to say it was for this reason, but we didn't believe them, and we gave them the highest charge. We leveled the highest charge against them. So there is awareness on that part. And the important thing is that when I was in the U.S., the criminal court handed the toughest sentence so far of 15 years for a man who killed his sister. Usually when the criminal court hands a sentence, it's automatically reduced to half, because the family of the victim, they're the same as the family of the defendant. So if it's 15, it becomes 7.5. If it's 2 years, it becomes 1. If 1, 6 months. So the court handed somebody 15 years and refused the family's request to drop charges. And I think this is a very important turning point in the judiciary in Jordan. Also in July of this year, a special tribunal was established just to handle these cases. Because before that, you would have the same case, the same circumstances. One tribunal would give the killer 7.5 years, another tribunal will give the killer 3 months. There was inconsistency, so they decided that they want to limit the work with one tribunal. Until this verdict, I never had an idea what would they really start sentencing. But now it looks like it's an improvement. So I think this is something very important. Of course, the other thing that I think is important is the media's involvement. For the past 5 years or so now, the media has been covering the issue of domestic violence, talking extensively about the issue of so-called honor crimes, and this is very important. One more thing is opening a women's shelter. For the longest time, we were fighting because we only had an NGO running a temporary shelter. The idea started in Jordan to open a women's shelter in 1997, I think, or something like that, whereby the women in prison would be housed in that shelter. Unfortunately, it took them 10 years to open it, but now it's called the Family Reconciliation House because they felt that shelter was a sensitive word that would not be accepted by people, and it's not housing these women. But there's an NGO that is trying also to help these women on individual cases. So at the end of the day, there is hope, of course. I'm an optimistic person, and I'm always hopeful that things will even improve more, because I could never imagine really what happened, the advancement that happened from the time I started until this day. Do I have more time? Yep. Yeah. In turn, I wanted to shed light on the experience of some other countries in our neighboring countries. I mean, I would like to give an example of Syria. Syria was a country that, in the mid-90s, they were talking about not having any crimes there. There was a regional conference, and the Syrian representative said they don't have these crimes. But now, I think because of the activism in Jordan, for the past 3 or 4 years, they've been also very active about this issue. Now they talk about 300 cases every year. They talk about 300 cases every year, and this is like a big number, although their population is much higher than Jordan, but still the fact that NGOs there are being involved, they're getting involved. Even their president, imagine, the president in July announced that they are changing one of the laws. So there are, I think that activism in our part of the world has opened the doors for other countries. Lebanon, they've did a lot of work. Palestine, in Yemen used to be like they never discussed this issue. Now they're talking about it. So I think it's all positive signs. Even the UN, I don't know if you noticed, the UN maybe for the past 7 or 8 years they started talking about this issue. They started recognizing so-called the violence against women, and so-called honor killings. It's a totally different problem, and they're doing things separately. So I mean, I think it's all positive indicators. As I said, I'm a very positive person, and I think that in Jordan these days, voices that are rejecting these crimes are much more than voices that used to applaud these murders. When I used to lecture in the past, and I go and lecture everywhere, wherever they ask me in Jordan and outside, I used to have men who would stand up and tell me, so what? I would kill my sister if she did something. Now I have men who would stand up and who would voice their anger about these crimes. I had public lectures 2 years ago, and I had 2 men who stood up, young men, and they were asking me individually, in a way or one way or another, that they know that killing their sister is wrong. Help me. They were asking me, help us. What can we do to avoid being put in this situation? So things are improving, but of course, the crime is still happening. This year we have 19 cases, which is a bit high. But as I said, this thing is not going to change overnight. It's not going to end. Changing the laws alone are not going to solve the problem. We have to work on it from a broader perspective, changing the laws, raising awareness, pushing community and religious leaders to speak more strongly about this issue, working on the education system, the awareness. It's a comprehensive process. If we do one thing, it's not going to help. Opening more houses, improving services for women. These are all important things. The final thing I would like to talk about which is my book, of course. The reason I wrote the book is to document cases, because, as I said, it's full of cases from all over the world. I want it to be like an objective, hopefully objective and credible source for anyone who wants to know anything about this issue. I'm also trying to target university students because I get a lot of emails from university students. They want to know about this issue. So now they have a book in their hand that they can take out any information. Of course, I want to raise awareness. I also want it to be a warning sign for women who think they are living in a safe environment, to know that they might not be living in a safe environment. Of course, the book is going to be translated into Arabic in 2 months' time, and let's hope for the best. And as I said again, it's a form of documentation of what's going on all over the world. There's a chapter on Europe, chapter on the US, chapter on the world. There's a chapter about this Jordanian woman who wrote a fake book claiming that her best friend was killed, and it was a horrible book. And the book, of course, ends with solutions and recommendations. And, of course, my hope is that I will contribute in saving lives and giving hope to women who are in need. And I guess I'll stop here and wait for your questions. Thank you very much.
Okay, terrific. Thank you so much. Let's get started up here, please. And just a reminder, if you can tell us who you are before you start your question.
Hi, I'm Dee Dee Cutler. Thank you very much for talking about a subject that is of intense interest, certainly to all of us here. I just wanted to ask you, isn't Queen Rania actively involved in this? And didn't she lead a march of women to the legislature to try and change the laws?
Thank you. Well, the entire royal family is very supportive of the work we do, and they all want to see an end to this. But they expect the civil society to do its part. And I think when I spoke now about the legal the changes in attitudes in courts, I think in a way they had a hand to do with it. They cannot interfere directly with certain things because as I said, they depend on the civil society. Now, Queen Rania, of course, has spoken about violence against women, violence against children. King Abdullah also spoke against, in a meeting with editors of newspapers last year, he said domestic violence against women and children is a red line to me. I mean, he was like, it's very rare that you see a head of state talking about something like this, and 6 months later, he spoke about it again and again. And the Queen, the same, Queen Noor, Princess Basma, Prince Ali, I mean, all these royal family members, they are involved one way or another. But as I said, they have to let the democratic process take its course. And Queen Rania actually did not lead the march, but I'm sure she supported us. But it was Prince Ali and Prince Ghazi who helped us with the march in the early 2000s. She wasn't in the march, but they did help us. Thanks.
Okay, there in the back.
Hi, Lisa Gans, International Medical Corps. Could you talk a little bit more about when you had young men in the audience who would ask you what they could do so they weren't put in that position? I'm actually working on some trainings to be implemented in Jordan to prevent honor killings. So any suggestions that you have for men like that would be really helpful.
I think it's very important to focus on men who oppose this murder to be part of your training. I think it would be very important, and I don't know how can you get this, but if you can find someone who killed his sister who regrets what he did, to be part of your team, or at least to bring her over to talk about it. I don't know how possible is that, because I think in general, and it's not, but I think many of the men who commit these murders are also victims, because I don't really think that a man wants to kill his female relative that he grew up with and he loved and cared for. But unfortunately, the circumstances, the pressure, the family pressure, the neighbors, the relatives, they put them in this pressure. If you don't kill people who look down on us, they will spit on us, they will consider us outcasts. And sometimes they use men who are under 18 because it's easier to manipulate them. They're younger and they are treated in a very light manner because they will be considered as juveniles and they will be released when they are 18 without a criminal record. So I think the most important thing is to focus on men who oppose this murder. I will give you an example that I included in my book because I thought it was a very important experience. I went into Sweden. Sweden, of course, did more. The leading country in fighting this problem in Europe was Sweden, and that was because a woman was killed there, and the community was shocked. And they formed a group of young migrant men. They called themselves Honor Hero or Sharaf Heroes. And they were going around talking to other migrant men about the need to respect women, not to kill women. And I think this is a very important experience. And I do mention this in my book, and I mention it in the recommendations. I think it's very important to involve men, specifically men who are against these killings. And these men, when they asked me, I told them, you have to try to convince your family, to talk to them, to persuade them not to do it. You have to encourage them to do some dialogue. And I always, when I lecture, I tell, sometimes I have people, okay, I will kill my daughter, blah, blah. I tell them, before you kill your daughter, stop and ask yourself where you went wrong. If you think your daughter did something wrong, question yourself. It's unfair for a big person or an old person, to punish a younger person. If you really think that your daughter did something wrong, you go and ask yourself why my daughter did something wrong. You don't go and hold her responsible. So I think these are the best ways to try to tackle the issue.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, my name's Elena Farsach. I have a question for you, and it's, I guess, probably on a touchier subject than even the idea of honor killing as far as women go. I've read some pretty awful things about young men who are being killed by their families for being homosexual. And I'm wondering if you, or even just
in Jordan?
In Jordan or anywhere, just the perception, if a man is a little bit more feminine, just the suspicion that that person may in fact be gay is enough for a family to conduct an honor killing. And if you cover that at all in your book, or if you've met with anybody concerning that. Thank you.
Well, there's a story that's happened in Turkey that is mentioned in the book. But as you said, this is a very sensitive issue. Unfortunately, homosexuality in our part of the world is still more than taboo. It's not just taboo. And it's always connected with religion. Last year, or I think this year, one of the newspapers wrote an article, and it was one of the leading newspapers in Arabic, about police arresting 4 gay men because they are gay, and they were, I don't know, in this street selling themselves or something, and it received horrible reactions from people. And then they interviewed sociologists who said these are sick people. And if the sociologists are saying that, so you're still before step number 1, you're less than 0 if the sociologists are saying that. So it's going to be really, it's very hard to tackle this issue. I have never encountered any crime whereby a person was killed because of his or her sexuality, because I think even if the person was gay, the family would not admit it. They are willing to say that he's a troublemaker, he's whatever, but they will not say that he was gay. I felt that there was one case that I covered that the victim was gay, but of course you can never know.
Yeah, back there, I'd like to jump in quick, just following on that second question about the role of men, because I think this is something we see a lot in reproductive health. We certainly saw it in this event around child sexual abuse, which is not just picking out the bad guys, but looking into all of the people who in the face of the culture, in the face of the circumstance, in the face of all the pressure they're facing, what is it about, whether it's this group, the Honor Heroes, or just about isolated men who resist the urge and who fight back against everything, and sort of, I don't know if discussions with them or reporting on them or programs trying to figure out what it is about these men that leads them to make the right decisions under very negative situations.
I don't think that I think in general in Jordan I haven't encountered this kind of attempt to thoroughly understand why these people, why men commit, for example, or try to talk to them or try to understand what they feel. We don't have this. We don't have this. I mean, even in regular murders, we've had some shocking murders that happened in Jordan, and I don't know if they ever, if they even studied. We had a young boy who murdered 12 people, his family, his neighbors, because they were harassing him about passing the final year of his school. I mean, he was tried and executed, and I don't even think that they ever thought of trying to understand why he did it, to understand. So this idea of trying to talk to killers or trying to understand or hear from them, it's still not new, and you need specialists, because if I go, I mean, I interview a killer in the book. There's a killer, and I used his words to explain that he really didn't want to kill his sister, because I don't believe, as I said, I don't believe that they all, I mean, the society is turning a normal human being into a killer. And this is something very bad. But I think if I go to them as a regular person, they might not admit, even, okay, if I talk to them, they might not tell you, oh, I regret it or whatever. They will not say it. You have to have specialists who are very good in taking out the information from them, and we still did not reach this stage, but I think it's something very important. And I think it's also in other countries. I don't think any country has reached the stage whereby they would examine the mental status of these men or their motives or so forth.
In the back, yes.
Alan Dyer, a psychiatrist with the International Medical Corps, and I guess my question is a follow-up to the follow-up, because I wanted you to comment more on what you said almost incidentally about so-called honor killings. It seems to me that there's a moral ambiguity in calling something, calling murder of any sort honorable when it's, in a sense, the most dishonorable kind of crime one can imagine. And the comments you were just making about trying to empathize with murderers.
Well, I wasn't the one who put the term honor killings, I mean, or honor murder. When I started reporting, it was already there. That's why I put so-called before because, as you said, there's nothing honorable. And if you say honor crime, you're as if you are justifying the murder. And that's why in the book I try to use it a lot in the book, because I want people to start shifting their ideas about this murder. I mean, there are some human rights activists all over the world who even want to use different namings like femicide, killing of women, and all these terminologies. But I think because the terminology is so strong and embedded in people's minds, so we start with so-called, and in the future I'm sure we will work on changing it. But yeah, I agree with you, the terminology is very bad, and it gives a justification for the murder and for the killers to be proud at one point of what they did.
Up here, Sean.
My name is Nada Krstic, and I come from a small country in Balkan. I'm here on exchange program. I'm just interested, how strong is the support of your religious leaders in your country and in countries surrounding you in this matter?
I think that the religious leaders could play a stronger role. I mean, when we did all the activities in the late 90s, we had the Kingdom's Mufti publishing an entire paper in the newspaper about this issue, and that it's against religion, and he explains it extensively in the paper. But then you had conservatives, the Islamic Action Front, who came out with their own explaining of things. So that's the problem. You have moderate people, and then you have extremists who try to spread different explanations. And that's why I think that it's very important for moderate leaders to really to talk about it constantly also, and not occasionally, because it's a big problem, and all religions are clear about this issue in specific, and the treatment of women, which unfortunately a lot of people are very successful in twisting facts and information about it to justify certain things. We always say that, you try to encourage them, and I think one solution is also to focus on the moderate religious leaders and try to interview them and to include them in activities, to try to spread their what they think about things. It's unfortunate, but it's not only about women, it's about many things in this life that are being twisted in the name of religion.
I'll get to you in a minute. I have a quick question. You've talked about a lot of resistance, from religious leaders, resistance from certain parts of the government, etc. You haven't mentioned anything about resistance from any of your editors or anyone in the newspaper industry. Our program has looked at a lot of issues that do receive a lot of resistance from editors, and I can see on one level how this is sort of an easy sell. It's about individuals. It's very personal, but I can see lots of reasons why they would resist as well. And I'm just wondering about your experience with getting the stories that you saw out there in different forums.
Well, I would say I'm an exceptional example, because the Jordan Times is read by the English readers, and readership is limited. So to answer you, my editors-in-chief, my colleagues, the majority were very supportive. They believed in human rights issues, not only this issue. Of course, wasn't it for their support, maybe I wouldn't be here today. Maybe I wouldn't have written a book. Maybe. So they've been very supportive. But I agree with you. Maybe in the Arabic press, there are some editors who would find this a family matter that they do not want to get involved with. Some reporters also try to shy away. They don't want to write about it because they might get in trouble as well. It's not an easy subject. But now I think with the movement and what I'm seeing now, because I'm doing a project, I'm monitoring the press and what they write about women, and I see a major change in the way they report. These crimes are now reported more extensively. As you know now, that all the newspapers are on electronically, and people can post comments. And many of the people, like when there's a so-called honor killing, people are commenting and basically condemning these crimes. So things are changing, but again, things will not change overnight. This is not an issue that we can say, okay, I'm going to press this button and things. It doesn't work this way. It's going to take time, and also I always, like when I sit with NGOs, I tell them, try to focus on the reporters who believe in your cause. That's one way to do it, for the time being, until things change to the way that we aspire them to change.
Okay. These right here in the middle, and then we'll get to you.
Thank you. I'm Rana Sheikh. I have two questions. One is very simple. What happened to the brother of the 16-year-old girl that you first mentioned? Because he was the one who committed the rape, but apparently he was not the one who killed her. The other thing is a little more complicated. I consider Jordan a moderate Islamic country.
You consider it what?
A moderate,
moderate
country. Actually, I was in Jordan. I thought it's a moderate country. Now, what is the incidence in other Islamic countries? Countries where the Islamic Brotherhood, or the groups, the Taliban, the Hamas, is the incidence of the so-called honor killings greater or not? Or do you have any figures on that?
And I would just add to that question, where do you go for your data, and how reliable is it, and what changes need to be made to maybe improve that data?
In terms of the brothers, the brother who raped her and attempted to kill her got 13 and a half years. And the brother who killed her got 15 years, and it was reduced to 7.5 years. And the brother who killed her was out, and I also interviewed him for my book. So And I asked him if he regretted killing her, and he said no, he didn't regret killing her, but he regretted wasting 5 years of his time in prison. And that in the future, if this happened again, he would lock her up in the house or tie her up as a sheep until she dies. In terms of, that's his opinion. In terms of, that was 5 or 6 years ago, the opinion, or 7 actually. As for incidents in Taliban or Hamas or the Muslim countries, these murders happen all over the world. And in Jordan, I covered 5 or 6 cases of Christian women who were killed. Same in neighboring countries. In Iraq, there is a Yazidi woman who is not from any faith who was also stoned to death for tarnishing her family's honor. In India, women from Sikh religion, they kill. So really, it has nothing to do with Islam. I think, as I said before, women get killed everywhere, but for different reasons. And in terms of Hamas and Taliban, I have no idea, really, to be honest. But as I said, I mean, women get killed for different reasons. No, Hamas, no, I've never thought of that, actually. Well, okay, in Syria there is, in Palestine there's about 15 cases reportedly every year, and maybe the number is a bit higher. In Syria it's around 200 to 300. Yemen it's about 300. In Pakistan it's definitely, they talk about 2,000, but I think it's much more than 2,000. In Bangladesh also the number is very high. There were 2 cases in Italy, imagine, in the past 2 or 3 years, of Italian men who were killing their sisters. So really, it's in South America, it's still reported. It's still reported in Turkey, of course, the numbers are very high. In Lebanon, they talk about 12 cases every year. So these are the figures, basically, that I know of.
Sorry? Oh, yeah.
The data.
Yes. Thank you.
Where I get the data? Well, basically, I get the data from more than one source, but I also count my stories, because until the longest time, they tried to manipulate the numbers. In the mid-90s, they would talk about 6 or 7 cases when you had over 20. So in the beginning, I was counting on my data, and at the Journal Times, we had this style. Every time we would count, this is number 11, this is number 12, until in the end we forced the government to admit or commit to the same numbers we have. Now if you talk to the government officials, they say similar numbers. Of course, you can also go back to, for your work and research, I would recommend the forensic department, the criminal investigation department, like the general prosecutor, the attorney general or general attorney, whichever we call him here, and the police. I wouldn't depend on the police as much, in Jordan at least, because they've never given out any correct figures. And this year they spoke about 7 or 8 cases, and then we had the Minister of Justice talking about 20 cases every year. And then my colleague here from Embassy of Jordan just told me that she read somewhere that Queen Rania herself talked about 20 cases or so every year. So, I mean, I would say the justice departments, the courts is a good source, and the coroners and the forensics, because of course every murder, every case, they have to examine, and they are a very reliable institute also that you can use in any country. That's of course if they are, you can tell, I mean, if they are, for example, in Jordan, the forensic department in Jordan, the people who worked there, most of them believed in this cause, and they used their science and their knowledge in helping and exposing the cause and documenting cases also. They go out and talk about it as well. It's not only me. They also have their own lectures, and they also show graphic details and pictures and so forth. So I would say these are the reliable. The last one is the police.
Okay. You have to do a lot of your own piecing together.
Of course, you do the piecing, and you count. I count my articles, and then you compare.
Okay. And back there.
Hi, Didi Cutler again. I just, in so many of these countries, the customs, such as honor killing, have really nothing to do with the law or the Quran. It's the family law, which often supersedes the law. And I'm just wondering, you're doing as much as you can, but what if you did it through the schools and had programs so that young boys learn that it's not right?
Yeah, thanks a lot for bringing this up. It's not the first time somebody suggests this. I wish I can do it, but I can't do everything. I can't do everything. I'm an individual. But I agree with you. I think it's very important to target schools. I always talk about education will solve most of our problems. Unfortunately, in Jordan and elsewhere in the Arab world, I feel the education system in schools is not up to what we aspire. There is still stereotypical images of women in the school textbooks. The teachers really are the product of these school textbooks, and they are not that well experienced. Many of them carry conservative ideas. They come from poor background. The teachers are they paid very little in Jordan, and now they've been paying attention to that. And Queen Rania initiated a program called Madrasati, or My School, whereby they're trying to target teachers and rehabilitate teachers, because it's very important. Even if you change the school textbooks, it's not gonna help if the teachers are not good or they don't believe in human rights, let's say, values and concepts. So I truly believe that education is the number one solution to all the problems we're seeing in the Middle East, not only in Jordan, by the way.
Yeah, up here.
Irene Tinker, University of California, Berkeley. You mentioned that you had a chapter on U.S. Mm-hmm. Are you, again, like in Sweden, talking about immigrant groups, or are you talking about others? Could you give some examples?
There are cases of immigrant groups, and there's a case of a man who killed his wife. That Equality Now, it's a U.S. organization that they adopted that case, and they were following it up because the judge, basically, this man found his wife committing adultery with another man, and he killed her. And he gave him a very light sentence, the judge, and told him, something like, I wouldn't know what I would have done if I were in your situation. And this really angered a lot of women groups here. Of course, there are a few cases, because until recently, the U.S., and I still think that the media has not taken up the issue that much here. They've talked about a case that happened last week of an immigrant who ran over his daughter. I'm sure most of you heard of it, but she's in critical condition. She still did not die. There's a case of a woman who was killed by her father and mother in the late 80s because she was dating a man and she wanted to live her life and be free. And they basically murdered her. And they were gonna, in a way, get away with it, but the FBI was monitoring them. And they sort of heard the conversation that happened, and they ended up receiving very high sentence. And I think they both died in prison. I think that still the issue here is not tackled as much. In Europe, they've done a lot of work. The NGOs extended their work to the migrant women there. They're trying to help them, giving them services, trying to teach them languages. The government's changed laws. The courts are now rejecting cultural excuse for someone who kills his female relative. So there are improvements there, and there is a big awareness. I mean, I think there were every year they would have 3 or 4 conferences on the issue in different countries in Europe. So work there is much more stronger, I think, than here in the U.S.
And that question?
Every time I answer a question more.
And Morton, would you mention caning? Caning, does it work into this process? Within the last couple of days, I have seen in the local papers, one woman sentenced 300 strokes with a cane, another woman in a different country, 60. When I was in Singapore, a young man was sentenced to 3 strokes of a cane, and the whole community around here was totally outraged with that. So can caning be considered a part of this murder, but not with a stone or a knife or a gun?
I don't know. I mean, some people are hit because they commit adultery. This is part of certain countries' laws and regulations. It doesn't happen in all the countries. It's just certain countries. And I guess a punishment is a punishment. I mean, some people are flagged. There was even a worse case that happened in Sudan recently of a woman who was sentenced to be flagged because she was wearing jeans. And I think I don't know if it made the press here. And she was a UN worker, and she resigned so that she could fight it in courts. So unfortunately, there are still some countries that use this kind of punishment, which we hope that it will disappear one day, because I think in general, countries that perform punishment in public, okay, be it executions, be it caning or whatever, I don't think really it's solving any problem. For example, there are countries where they execute people in public that every year you see the crime is increasing. So I think that this does not help, and they have to find a better way to, like in most societies, on how to punish people and rehabilitate them, you know. It's not about inflicting punishment. It doesn't matter, okay, if you cane someone, or so what, if that person, if you do not understand, try to understand why this person did this and try to help this person, you've only created more problems, because people will be more angry and they want to go out and do more violations, you know.
Thought I saw a couple more hands. There's one back there.
My name is Mary Mullen. I was wondering what the statistics were in Saudi Arabia, and then I was wondering
about so-called honor killings.
Yes, and then I wanted to ask about what has the UN actually done. You said that they've recognized it, but what have they done?
Well, I don't know anything about Saudi Arabia, because they don't have. I mean, if you try to find anything about anything, you're not gonna find an answer. They tell you that they don't have so-called honor killings. That's what they claim. Because, you know, if a person kills a woman, then he will be executed. But we never know if that's the case or not. I report about a case where I've taken it from the newspapers, about a man who killed his daughter because she was chatting on Facebook. But, I mean, I don't know if this was reported in the Western media. We don't know if it's right or wrong. Regardless, I heard from somebody one time that they might take them and kill them and bury them in the desert, and nobody will know. But you can never know anything really until the Saudi community opens up and starts addressing, which they are trying to now, to open up, and they're trying in the simplest ways to open up to their problems. But you cannot. It's impossible to know, to be honest. And even if you ask people who work with NGOs, which are very little, I'm sure you're aware, they will tell you they don't have this problem. So it's very hard to know. The UN issued several resolutions and concerning this issue. You know, some countries signed, some countries did not sign. At one point, it was discussed in certain sessions. So this is something very important. I mean, if you go back, you will see there is work that was done by the UN. So I think I always say it's very important for this issue to be addressed on all levels. Be it one person to one person, newspaper article, a book, a brochure, lecture, everything will help. Everything will help to spread the word.
And there's a question in the back there.
Hello, Rana. It's good to see you again. Working on the Hill and in the region, Afghanistan, Pakistan, there's a lot of discussion surrounding U.S. assistance for women in these countries. At the same time, Afghan parliamentarians, Pakistani women will comment about the influence that U.S. speakers have about women's issues, and their concern that we do it judiciously, especially in a country where they're trying to make strides. How would you advise members of Congress or those who work for them in approaching women's issues? Yours is one of the more extreme, but there are also improvements in the treatment of women, their representation across government. But when a woman parliamentarian has to sit next to a very conservative cleric, as a colleague, I've actually had them say, please ask them to be more powerful but more quiet in doing so. How can that be achieved?
Wow, it's a tough question, but I think first of all, I insist that you should first of all address the issue of violence against women, discrimination in a global manner before you talk about a certain country, so that you will not offend them, and you will create a backlash. They say, look, they're interfering, and that's been like the word for the longest time. I mean, there's been heavy criticism on the U.S. On the way, they said, okay, they want to liberate women in Afghanistan and in Pakistan and elsewhere, and as you noticed, nothing is liberated. Even in Iraq, the situation got worse for women. Before during Saddam's time, women had more rights. In general, of course, the people were oppressed, but when we talk about rights, now the Iraqi government, they drafted a personal status law that basically took many of the rights that they had. So this is something that you have to take into consideration, that people are not seeing any positive changes. The only way to do it is to have people, there who have guts, who will not take political consideration when drafting things, because everything is politicized. Okay, we'll please these people by taking rights from women, and then we'll do this so that we will please I don't know what. That's the problem. Women and children's issues are always politicized all over the world. Even in Jordan, the issue of so-called honor crimes was politicized. So you have to have somebody who really has guts, who really is courageous enough to take decisions away from religion, because really, if you want to talk about religion, the religion really, in a way, it secures a lot of rights. But they are taking that away. They are twisting the religion. They are, so you have to find someone who will really speak out and talk about the true rulings of the religion when they want to write their personal, because the personal status law is the worst. It could be the worst thing. It could be the worst enemy of women, because this is where they control women's life. With the personal status law, you can't divorce. If your husband, your husband can't divorce you by uttering the word. If you want to divorce, it would take you forever to divorce. You can't have child custody. You can't do this. You can't do that. You can't. And most of these things are guaranteed. If you want to talk about religion and the true explanation of religion, there is a lot of things that are explained. So you have to have someone who would really speak up against, clearly about this issue. Other than that, it's going to be very hard, because you will always find someone who's going to try to politicize this and make gains out of this issue.
And here in the middle.
Thank you. My name is Laura Meyer. There's an attitude I've observed from studying and visiting the Middle East where among young men, they consider it okay to have relationships with other women, someone else's sister, someone else's daughter. Mm-hmm. But when they become enraged at the idea of it being their sister or their daughter, and yet they won't admit to themselves that there is a contradiction there. And would you agree that this is probably one of the ingredients that facilitates these crimes? And how can you sort of tackle that within the traditional views on dating and gender relations, etc.?
Of course, I agree with you that it's hypocrisy. I mean, I've also had people who would tell me I would do whatever I want, but my sister is free, cannot do anything. And I would tell them, okay, you want to do whatever you want. What are you doing it with a ghost? Aren't you doing it with a woman? If you really care, about your sister not being touched by anyone, why do you give why you give yourself the authority? And of course, they don't know what to answer you. So the best way is to try to challenge them in this way, not of course to anger them, but to get it back at them and let them think about it. They will think about it. Maybe in front of you they will say, oh, but when they go home, they will think about it. But it's unfortunately, it's double standards. In our part of the world, there are a lot of people who think they do not commit mistakes. There are many people who think that they are always right. And as long as we live in this situation, you will never achieve any accomplishment, because people make mistakes and people learn from their mistakes. And, again, I always stress that part of these murders is the fear. There's what we call the fear factor, people fearing what others might think of them. What would they say? What would they do? If I was driving this old car, what would people think about me? I have to look and, So there's always this wanting to live for others, not for themselves. So it's a long battle.
Miha. Not sure that one's working. Can you?
No, it is working.
It is? Okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No. It did work, but...
Involved in any of these decisions to commit crimes in order to protect the honor of their families? Are these decisions all made by men, or are women matriarchs involved in any way in endorsing this practice? And if so, how is that playing out in Jordan?
Okay, she asked about
thank you. I just want to, the question is, for those listening online, if that didn't come through, is what is the role of women in all this? Is there a matriarch system? Are mothers or sisters playing a role in these decisions?
Well, there is two kinds. There is the kind that, of course, opposes these murders, but they cannot say anything because if they do, they will get killed. And you have mothers, unfortunately, who believe that their daughter deserves to be killed or sisters, because they did something wrong, and they will be a lesson to others. I have reported the case of a woman who axed her daughter to death 2 years ago for becoming pregnant out of wedlock. And there are cases of women who took part in luring their female relatives to their death. And there were cases whereby sisters took part in the murder by pinning down their sister or, holding them or something. So...
and then let's get these two questions together and answer them together as well. Go ahead.
Yes, my name is Mary Mullen again. I was wondering about the wives, how many wives a man can have, and whether that sort of includes women and what part they might take in these honor killings.
And then let's get this one also. Go ahead.
Just in support of the point that these are problems everywhere, the women's movement in this country has done a study of various, the amount of time women are given versus men in terms of various crimes, and show there's tremendous differentiation. But in San Francisco, a group of women lawyers who were supporting women who had, after a lot of domestic violence, had killed their husbands, were getting much heavier terms than the men who eventually killed their wives. So, it isn't, the double standard is alive and well in this country. If you need data, I'm sure we can help you find it.
Well, yeah, thanks. But, I agree with you, but I hate to, try to compare and say, here is bad and we are, it's bad everywhere. A lot of people in Jordan try to say, oh, okay, look, you're talking about here, but look, in the States, like you said, they have discrimination, women get raped, blah, blah, blah. Okay, you have your problems here, we have our problems, we shouldn't, I agree with you. That's why I say we have to constantly address this issue. The U.S. still did not sign CEDAW. I'm sure you know the Convention on the Elimination of so-called discrimination against women. So there is a lot to be done here. There is a lot to be done there, and it's good that there are people working everywhere. It's unfortunate, but it's a struggle we have to go through. In terms of how many wives a man can have, of course, according to the religion and to the Sharia, it's 4. He can have 4 wives, and it has nothing to do. I've never reported a case where a so-called honor killing happened in that atmosphere. It's irrelevant. There is no relevancy at all.
And I'd just like to ask, I think, one final question here, which is, you mentioned that your final chapter gets into solutions and recommendations, and it's obviously a big problem, and I think a lot of us are overwhelmed by the personal stories and involved. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us sort of 2 or 3 thoughts for So some significant progress has been made getting this issue on the table, and in some cases passing some laws and that sort of thing. But I'm wondering what you see as sort of the work of the next several years.
As I said, I think we need to continue on raising awareness, discussing this matter. I talked about the Sharaf Hero as a solution. I talk about humanitizing the cases, because many of these cases, as I said, go unreported, or the reporting is very weak. We need to give each of these cases the true picture of what happened, so that people would feel with the victim, feel that they need to be involved to do something about it, changing the laws, improving services, education. So there's a lot of things, but I think these are the major things. Of course, the media has an important role to play. And leaders, community leaders, religious leaders, they all have a role to play in.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you all for coming, and please welcome me, and thank you, Rana, for her book and for her presentation. Thank you.